right. So I'm Kali Luna. I'm out here in California, and we're waiting for Matthew from Virginia Solidarity Economy Network to come on. But I'm going to go ahead and get started. California Solidarity Economy Network is very new. We've only been organizing for a little under a year. Um, Back in last fall, we started meeting and we had a 4-month sprint using a modified lean agile process to explore whether there was interest in starting a similar network in California to Massachusetts Solidarity Economy Network and Virginia Solidarity Economy Network. And the process went quite well. Um, just rewinding back a little bit, part of how we came to um, the idea and the enthusiasm to build a network for California. I would say, like, for me personally, it started back in 2008, 2009. Around the recession, I started to organize in the Bay Area Solidarity Economy Network with No Boss and the community currency that I was starting called Bay Area Community Exchange. And we started, yeah, connecting all the dots of the different solidarity economy projects, and we just didn't have the I think the public knowledge and awareness of that, that an alternative economic system was needed, but also as soon as their sessions started to ease up a little bit, then people shifted their attention. And I think now there's critical consciousness that makes it possible here in California, especially as the economic system has changed quite a bit, even just in the last few years with massive inequality just skyrocketing here. Um, and in 2003, there was a group of folks initiated by a group called EcoCiv that brought together a number of different organizations from across the state that were doing economic and social justice and some environmental justice work as well, um, for the Just Economy Summit. And we took that list, and that was kind of the base of the organizations that we reached out to. Um, Also in 2024, at the Atlanta Resistant Build Convergence, um, there were some sessions where we were starting to brainstorm, what it would look like in California, and if we had the momentum to do that, started to map out what that would look like. So I'm very grateful for the resistant build process, and also USN and New Economy Coalition gave us a tiny bit of money to get started. So that's the seeds of the California Solidarity Economy Network. And then um, yeah, there's a number of different organizations involved. There's ones that are like publicly committed and other ones that are just kind of feeling it out as we develop the process and see where this is going. But definitely led by the Sustainable Economies Law Center. It's kind of one of the anchor organizations, Solidarity Research Center, which includes Los Angeles for All, down in Southern California. Native Roots Network has been a major player. Lift Economy, the North Coast Progressive Alliance, California Donut Economics Coalition, Cooperation Works, and the California Public Banking Alliance has been a really strong ally as well. And we decided that our mission was going to be to bring together grassroots communities, organizations, and movements to work to build a just, sustainable, and democratic economy from the ground up. I think the democratic is like a key piece that distinguishes us from a lot of other organizations, and there are a lot of organizations doing great economic work in California. We're rooted in relationships of solidarity, cooperation, care, and we uplift real world alternatives like cooperatives, community land trusts, public banking, mutual aid networks, and much more that put people and the planet before profit. California Solidarity Economy Network organizes the political, social, and economic power required to create a post capitalist world where communities meet their own needs collectively with dignity. And our vision is a California where we hold the collective power to shape our communities through economic democracy, shared ownership, and ecological stewardship. The solidarity economy is a post-capitalist, very important framework and practice to nurture relationships of solidarity and care and encourage cooperation over competition. and develop the equitable economic systems that sustain us. In this future, wealth and decision making are shared, not hoarded, and everybody, especially those pushed to the margins, can live with dignity, joy, and self determination. And some of the goals that we've started to brainstorm, although we do have a retreat, fortunately at the end of the year, where we're going to be discussing this a lot more and fleshing it out with the entire group and some new groups joining. Current goals that we've kind of brainstormed are to connect solidarity economy projects for mutual support and learning, and we've already started doing this in our monthly circles. We have both a support component where we do go around and do offers and needs, and then also each organization presents on a monthly basis. So we switch. So like 1 month Cooperation Works will present, and so we all learn about what they're doing, and they can also ask for. We'd like to create collaborative projects that strengthen the movement and fuel new solidarity economy projects to fill needed gaps for communities across California. We educate the public about the failures of capitalism and the solidarity economy solutions that already exist. We advance policies that remove barriers to and invest in the spread of solidarity economy projects. And we want to build political power bases, especially important at this moment. And what's working for California Solidarity Economy Network, each month we invite an organization to do a deep dive on who they are and what they do. This has been such a rich process to just learn really all the amazing work that's being done in the state. Each month we also host a short offers and needs session, as I mentioned before. And yeah, there have been a lot of connections made where um, yeah, we have different assets and skills, and combining our resources, we're definitely stronger together in this kind of, I would say, like, not marginalized, but like niche component of the movement. We have an in-person strategy weekend at Native Roots Network in December 2025. We're super excited about this. We're planning the agenda, and we would love more support for this if anybody's able. And our challenges, so there's a lot of challenges, to be honest. Our capacity is very limited, as we're actually, I didn't mention this at the beginning, but we're shaped a little bit differently from Virginia and Massachusetts Solidarity Economy Network, especially Virginia. We are more focused at this moment on organizations just because the state is so huge that we have to have organizations that have their own memberships, either geographically or issue-based. Um, to help organize, because there's no way we could organize the whole state as an organization itself. So it's a more of a decentralized model, but we don't have individual members at this time. But each of those member organizations are already at, or in some cases, well beyond capacity, trying to do the awesome work that they're doing uh, with limited funding and limited staff. And the Democratic Party establishment often prioritizes corporate donors and moderate policies in California, creating tension between grassroots progressives and institutional Democrats. This is also true in solidarity economy or economic justice work in California. There's a little bit more of a prioritization around funding more conventional economic justice organizations, which, we fully support, and we want people to do that work as well. But yeah, there's not a lot of resources going towards what we're doing. Even for things that have been very well proven, like the public banking efforts in California, which has just kind of taken off very much so in the last couple of years. California's economy is shaped by powerful industries, big tech, agribusiness, real estate, fossil fuels that wield immense lobbying power and influence over legislation, um, and really, though, not just the legislation, but really the whole economy. Um, and then another, I would say, to me, this is actually the biggest challenge, is organizing a large state, a state that's larger than most countries. And also, we're very, very divided between very urban and very rural. The coastal part of California is super urban. You have Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Diego, and Sacramento, and then a huge part of the state is very dispersed, very small rural communities that have very different cultures and resources. Racialized inequality, language barriers, cultural differences, they complicate coalition building, and we have to be very sensitive to that as we build. Um, Also, skyrocketing housing costs and economic inequality sap our organizing capacity as organizations and people struggle for survival. Yeah, so that's the California Solidarity Economy Network in a nutshell, in just our first year. I'm just checking to see if Matthew or Terry is here yet, so they can join and fill in with Massachusetts or Virginia Solidarity Economy Network. Let's see.
I'm not seeing them here. Um,
So they were supposed to get their own personal links, and I don't know if they got them. I'm also happy to take questions right now about our work and see, um, yeah, if we can wait until they show up or they figure out how to get on. Are people able to ask questions? Is it unmuted?
questions. I believe that questions can be posted in the Q&A as well as in the chat.
Okay.
Should be a Q&A box.
Okay. I don't see any there. Oh, okay. Somebody says, can you talk more about how you are working with California public banking? Yeah, well, I personally just started to get more involved in the California Public Banking Alliance. They need a lot of support, and there's multiple programs going on right now. Um, and one of the, I don't know if I'm supposed to talk about this publicly. I know that there have been there was a statewide initiative for a California state public bank, and that was sidelined a bit in favor of I think because of the political will for that was not quite there, or the funding, and so they kind of shifted towards more municipal banks and through the state, and so that has been going very, very well. um, but recently, because of the federal budget cuts and the need for funding for climate, for housing, those two especially, um, and yeah, and California state budget deficits, there is definitely renewed interest for a state bank. And I think that's kind of where we want to put some of our energy in the next year. And it's, again, definitely need not just funding. I mean, we have like one grant for one person full time, but also like definitely more organizations that are interested in helping organizing, and then individuals who want to lend their time and their skills to the effort. And it's very, very well organized. Um, but yeah, again, organizing for a whole state that is really the size of or larger than most countries is quite a challenge. So Somebody asked about um, our victories and accomplishments we'd like to celebrate. I would say it's a little early for that. We're building very intentionally, um, trying to build trust and also, our processes as we go along, and just really a strong foundation. Um, and to my knowledge, the other networks that were started in Massachusetts and Virginia have developed similarly, that we've all kind of developed slow and building building a network or a coalition is kind of a delicate process. And I would say particularly around those challenges that I mentioned around the divide between different cultures within California. It's a very, very diverse state, economically, urban, rural, racially. There's so many different places where we could get caught up in those differences, and also being really cognizant and delicate around power imbalances, things like that. So as we build, we're trying to work through all that and really have it be a collective process and not just one organization kind of directing everything, to build that trust. And so I would say our accomplishments so far has really been around um, building a strong foundation. And next year, I think we'll be much more in action mode, and hopefully pending funding that will have some legs. Yeah, building at the speed of trust. Mhm. Yeah. Does anybody have any other questions?
I'm seeing some questions in the Q&A
Oh,
box.
okay, great. Those just popped up. What is a solidarity economy? Um, please give us, okay. So solidarity economy, it's pretty off the top of my head. I've been doing it for so long, um, that it's like, how do I explain it? Um, I actually joined the U.S. Solidarity Economy Network pretty soon after it was developed, back in the 2000s. I was on the board for a number of years, and yeah, so I think one way to think about it is, how is it different from other economic work, either economic justice work or environmental economics or political economics? I would say really focused on democratic processes and structures. Um, Collective ownership is huge, cooperation over competition, and really focusing. We have been focusing on building very tangible projects that make a difference. And we've seen this in Europe, where there's whole ecosystems in parts of Europe where they've developed entirely alternative economic projects that support the community in ways that are more um, democratic and cooperative, and owned, and the decision making is run by the people who are receiving the services or producing them. And we do want to take this another step further, and really get into the political elements as well, not just to like help catalyze the movement, but also because politics and economy are so intertwined. Um, And yeah, the solidarity, there's a whole definition on the USN website, the different components about it. So I won't rattle all those off. Um, but there are very specific tenets that we subscribe to. And, we don't, every member doesn't have to subscribe to every one of them perfectly, but that's kind of our North Star and our compass for the work. Let's see. Nikhil says, are there any recommendations you have for organizers who are trying to set up their own networks? What is the public thing? Can you get time? Can you talk more about the philosophy of SE? Okay. So yeah, I will talk about what I would recommend for organizers trying to set up their own networks. Um, it really, I think, depends on the specific context in which you're working. Um, I would say, like, I know that Virginia has focused a little bit more on organizing individuals and kind of kept it open. Um, and I think has a little bit more of a social network. here in California, the member organizations are key. So we reached out to the organizations, had one-on-one conversations with them about, did they have the capacity to participate? What would the benefit be to their organization? What could we provide in terms of the network, given that we're just starting? And what were their visions for the future of a network if we were to proceed? So then we had those initial conversations as a group over the course of 4 months, and that kind of helped us determine whether we had the capacity to even do this. And I would say that that's been, yeah, it's been a big limiting factor for folks. So if those organizations or those individuals have the capacity, really mapping out like what are your resources in terms of like the people and the organizations that they have to offer, and also mentioning mapping, which we haven't done yet in California, and they have done in other places. I've actually done a lot of solidarity economy mapping. It's a great place to start, to just take a big picture view of the state or the region that you're in and identify all the actors that are possible allies. And that could be solidarity economy projects themselves that already identify. It could also be other organizations like farm worker organizations, or CSAs, or that may community supported agriculture organizations that don't already identify, like unions and um, caregiver alliances, things like that. So all of those could be, also tenant organizing, it's huge in California. All of those could be included under the umbrella of solidarity economy and would be great allies for organizing, for both supporting them in like helping them think about their work more innovatively, like how could it include solidarity economy elements, and also building our base in terms of reach. Um, so that we're figuring out what that reciprocal element would be with those organizations as well. And then figuring out like what you want to work together on. You have to have some kind of like exciting project to like build that glue and that momentum and that excitement about what is the change that we're going to make, and really distinguishing that but from reformist work, which might be like working for higher minimum wage or other social safety net issues. Super, super important. We can't even do the solidarity economy work unless that's being done. Um, and people's survival is number one. Um, but yeah, really thinking about how we might one up that, in terms of like, what is the vision that we actually hold? What is the world that we actually want to see? Because I think a lot of the times we are limited by the imagination of what the powers that be say we can do. And that's part of the power that they hold over us. So this space creates an opportunity. These organizations and networks create an opportunity to think a little bit bigger about is what is the world that we actually want to see, and how we might manifest that in very practical ways. Um, yeah, that's a lot. Let me check the questions again. Are any of the other hosts here? Oh, can you say more about entirely alternative economic projects in Europe? I have not been in touch with that work for quite a long time, so I feel a little bit out of the loop with that. I know that some of my colleagues have been visiting Europe regularly and more in touch with that movement. Um, if you get time, can you talk about the... Yes, so there is a manifesto on solidarity economy on the USN website. I could probably plug that in once I'm stopped talking. Um, and somebody also asked, what is a public bank? I am a huge proponent of public banks. I'm so excited that public banking is finally taking off in California after so long. Um, but it's basically, and I might get this wrong, um, but it's taking the resources that normally would go into a private bank, and the the interest that they would get, and the loan returns that they would get would go towards wealthy people or investors, and instead it's reinvested into the community, and also the community or whatever body is in charge of the bank. It could be a state advisory board or some kind of mission-driven organization that's helping to oversee the public bank. If it's like, um, yeah, if it's a city bank focused on environmental issues or housing or whatnot, they get to help make the decision about where those funds go. And so, one of the huge benefits of public banking at this juncture is that there's a lot of investments, public investments that we need to make that conventional banks are just not, they're not making them because there's not enough of a return or they're too risky. And the reality is that that's their perception, but there's ways to mitigate that risk. And banking shouldn't just be to make money for wealthy people. It's, it could very well be a public asset. It should be a public asset. And so it's sort of like, yeah, it's a bank to reinvest in the community, and particularly again for climate and building affordable housing in California. Those are key priorities that we have, that we could get hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars redirected towards those projects by investing public money in those public banks instead of funneling them through private banks, and also um, being approved by private bank loan officers that don't have the same priorities that we do or our communities do. Yeah, the Bank of North Dakota, somebody put in the chat, it's very, very, um, very long-standing example of, well, the Bank of North Dakota isn't particularly progressive. They have very much stabilized the economy. So even when North Dakota and the rest of the country has hit major recessions, the economy of North Dakota has remained much more stable because of the Bank of North Dakota, and we've seen that in other countries as well. Um, yeah, thanks for putting the links in the chat.
Kelly, I don't know if you want to open up to any of the other folks who are on as panelists or co-hosts, if they'd like to chime in.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, are there so who's here and can they present
We have
now?
Liza, Matthew, Eleanor, just saying folks who are listed as hosts or co-hosts.
Okay. So if Matthew's here, he can present.
I don't think Matthew's here.
Okay.
We do have Eleanor, Katie, Liza, Ruth, and John. That's just who I'm seeing who's listed as co-hosts.
Hmm. Okay. Whatever you'd like to do. I'm
No, feel free to keep
I
going.
don't
I wanted to invite them if anyone would like to.
yeah, jump in.
This is Ben Mansky here. I've relocated, but I do know that Ruth Kaplan, who's here from Massachusetts, has been very involved with public banking there, and I'm wondering if she might be in a
That'd be
position
great.
to verbalize at least if she was willing to do that. We can see you in the chat there, Ruth, if you're up for that, and if not, that's fine. But just looking through who is here as an attendee, and I'll also say for those for whom this is new, Matt Slaats is a very reliable person. As yeah, you see Kali's reaction there. And is got his hands full with all kinds of work with the Virginia Solidarity Economy Network, but also with building participatory budgeting in the city of Richmond. And there he is. I was just praising you, and Matt is
Yay!
a Wisconsinite in exile. So I'll be quiet now. There we go.
Hi, everybody. Sorry about this confusion of time frames and everything on my end. So yeah, Ben and April, thank you for everything you're doing. And Kali, thank you for coming on in. Yeah, so we're here to talk about in solidarity economy state networks. Um, um, I'm really grateful to have everybody here. Thank you, April, for sharing that. So something that we've been actually working on for a little while, thinking about like what does it mean to create state networks around solidarity economy. And she wasn't able to be here, and that was Terry, but Massachusetts kind of is the first network that kind of established itself as a statewide network several years ago, based on like some solidarity economy organizing that's been taking place for a long time. And then what's been great is that Virginia created um, a network that I started in 2020. And then it's really great to see California now making some steps into creating their own network. So what we wanted to do was kind of like walk through some of the ideas and the tools that we've been thinking about in terms of like how do we build these networks. So since I'm at fault for being late, Kali, do you actually want to go first? Do you want to talk first?
Yeah, actually, I filled in the whole first part of it. I did my
Great.
presentation and I
Okay.
answered a bunch of questions, so it's all you.
Okay, so I'll go on to Virginia. So, April, if we can go to that next slide. So, just to talk about Virginia, so I think like we got to remember too that Virginia is the like the center of the beginning of colonization of North America. It's one of the original centers of European colonization, and that continues to influence the political systems, the economic systems that are going on. But so much of what Virginia Sen began with was kind of thinking and experiencing the Unite the Right rally that took place in 2017. And then in 2020, the mixture of the George Floyd protests and the COVID-19 pandemic that impacted us all. So a lot of what we were responding to was again these systemic systems of white supremacy, colonization, and the issues that we saw were that yeah, these things were happening, but there wasn't a bigger kind of conversation that needed to happen about not just about resisting this work, but actually, um, what are we building in the future? And so solidarity economy kind of became a rallying point for a lot of what we're doing. And thinking through. But it was really like these moments and many other moments that kind of spurred efforts in Virginia. So next slide. So the mission, vision, and goals, like so. The VA-SEN really sees itself as just a network, right? It's just a group of people from around the state that are really trying to like support, educate, and connect people to build a more equitable and resilient economy based on these shared values. And so a lot of that language is actually coming from both other groups around the US, but then internationally, because we're building on a history and a lineage of movements that, were very influenced by efforts that started in South America, and then and in Europe that have spread. And try to think about like what does that really mean and how does that work in Virginia specifically. So we're really just a group of people, all volunteer as of right now, that are kind of coming together to kind of think through, how do we support these various efforts that are going on around the state. You can go to the next slide. So again, this gets a good point. Like I throw this slide up because as one of the organizers down at Highlander reminded us once that um, Virginia is not one thing. It's not one place. It's multiple places, and they all have different lineages and histories of resistance and imagining new futures. And one of the difficulties of doing this work, especially during the pandemic and doing it on Zoom, was like, what is Southwest Virginia, which has much more connection to Appalachia and West Virginia, or South Central Virginia, which is much more culturally connected to North Carolina, have to Central Virginia, the Shenandoah, Northern Virginia, the Tidewater, right? Like we have to recognize that we're working across these very different histories and cultures. And so that's one of the big questions for us. Like, how do we do that in meaningful ways? And how do we develop, ways of connecting, very, very different experiences and, cultures and racial identities and gender identities and all those different things. So that's been a big question for us. And how do we do that in meaningful ways? But recognizing that there is that difference, and we need to like support that difference. And that's actually like a big piece of like the pluralistic kind of vision for solidarity economy. And we see that being a part of the vibrancy of these movements is that they are rooted in those cultures, and we're connecting with those things. Can you go to the next slide? Okay, so this is kind of a really quick synopsis of what's been going on. And accomplishments that we've been doing. So the first thing we did, you can see in the kind of the center, is that we kind of started to map out what was going on. We were like, who's doing what? And so we started just to talk to people. We reached out to people. We've seen there's a lot of mapping efforts that go on to try to like document, but those are really only specific snapshots of what's actually happening in a moment. It's a moment in time. And so for us, it was about relationship building more than it was about like putting someone on a map and trying to identify them. And we also realized that a lot of groups didn't want to be identified in specific ways. So we started just kind of like connecting with people, talking to them, talking about these values of democracy, sustainability, equality or equity, pluralism, and solidarity, and what those meant to them. And then from that, we started to like think about like what does it really mean to connect. And so we started organizing what we call a learn-in. We were doing these like quarterly for the most part. And so we did one on mutual aids. We brought all the mutual aid groups that are doing work in Virginia together to have a conversation about what they were doing, why they were doing it, what connections they have, maybe spurring others. We did the same thing. Like we were seeing a kind of a really quick growth of people's assembly movements in Virginia right now. And so we brought together people doing those movement assemblies, and to think about like, well, what are they trying to accomplish? How can we share ideas? And there's actually some history of that in Virginia. So we brought that history forward. Like we're always trying to loop back in and connect back into, especially histories of indigenous and communities of color, black organizing that's been taking place in Virginia for such a long time. We've done a bunch of readings. You see, Collective Courage there. That has been an opportunity just to kind of like read together, learn together. We do a lot of our reading very slowly. So it's about connecting and having an open conversation, not about just gathering information from a book and kind of regurgitating it. It's like, what does this mean to us? But then there's amazing programs that have been going on around Virginia, like Appalachia Voices has the New Economy Network that's been going on, which is focusing more on just transition work, mostly in Southwest Virginia. We've got Madre Tierra in Fredericksburg, which is a Latina domestic violence group that's been doing great work. And they're working on some cooperative housing and some other things. Seiko Soul has been organizing in Northern Virginia for a while. And then we've been doing the Richmond People's Budget. The first cycle just ended. So that's the first participatory budgeting process in Virginia that took place this year, and trying to build on that. And then another piece is thinking about cooperative economy stuff. So Common Shares is a brand new not cooperative development center that we're getting off the ground. That's really meant to kind of build an economy for cooperatives, worker cooperatives in the state of Virginia. But it's not just about cooperatives by themselves, but like how are we creating like integrated economies that use work cooperative ideas as their centering force. So those are some of the things that we've been working on in the last few years, and there's a lot more too. I mean, there's such a dearth of ideas and practices that are happening. You can go to the next slide. So in terms of like what's working, like I think this idea of what is solidarity has been a big question. Um, how do we build it? How do we maintain it? Um, some people will harp on us like, unless you're showing up at my stuff, like you're not in solidarity. And I don't think that's really about it. It's really about the relationship. Solidarity means that you can work together for a while and then, life takes a different change and you go off and do something different, but then you come back and you're trying to commit to those relationships. So that's a big question for us. We've been moving from a model of like come one, come all to more of a like let's see these hubs of activity that are rich happening. So like we want to give them autonomy to do that work. And then how is Virginia Center creating these touch points for those groups to be in relationship and support each other in the work that they're doing? So there's a new VA Cent hub in Northern Virginia. There's a group in Shenandoah called Cooperation Shenandoah. Yeah, I mean, again, we mentioned the New Economy Network. So it's really about maintaining and allowing those groups to do what they need to do. And then the Virginia Center is really just about supporting them in different ways and building those connections. Yeah, I'll just run through. I mean, one of the other big things we talk a lot about, especially in the context of Virginia, where we're a right to work state and we're a Dillon rule state, is that power is held at the state level and not the local level. So we need to build like new enabling infrastructure. There's not good state law and cooperatives. Um, there's not good infrastructure for, co-governance at various levels, which really centers residents' voices in the decisions that impact their lives. So like we see ourselves as kind of trying to insert ideas and try to strengthen the opportunities and build the infrastructure for those things to happen. But other than that, we've been, raising a little bit of money to support dinners. We've been organizing a lot of dinners that are really about bringing people together and having them envision what they want for the future of Virginia. Um, yeah. And I would say too, one of the big struggles that we've been kind of thinking about is like we don't necessarily want to be a nonprofit. Like don't want to be beholden to those rules and don't want to be but then we recognize that if we want to raise money, we have to have some way of having an institution. So really trying to find ways to think through that and to explore those opportunities that give us our ability to do the work that we're doing. And lastly, we find that it's really about building pathways into movement. It's not an ideological stance. Like we're not we're not going to hold to a specific idea of what the world should be, but we're trying to create ways to allow people to come into that conversation and then explore that together with us. And so I would say it ultimately we're centered in envisioning a post-capitalist world, but again we're recognizing that people are coming in from different positions and how do we allow them to do that is a big piece. Yeah. And then, I mean, I think I've got one more slide, but I'm happy to open it up to questions too with a few minutes left. I want to give some space because I know there's another panel coming in not too long. So if you can see those challenges, capacity is always a challenge, solidarity across distance, the role of the network, how do we sustain these structures? So there are questions in the chat, the Q&A. Yeah. So John asks, the Region 8 map of Virginia, how challenging it may be to organize across that diversity. How much thought cross-fertilization given to a concept of bioregions, which may have natural shared interests. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think like I mean, even the boundary of Virginia, right, is not it's not a real thing, right? I mean, legally it's a real thing, and politically it's a real thing, but we recognize it. And I think that's a really great idea of how do we move across those. Um, we know that we have solidarity much more in connection to other groups like in North Carolina and Appalachia, which is working in West Virginia and Ohio and other states. So I think that's a really great way of thinking about um, that diversity and so and I think one of the things we talk a lot about is that yes, we're the Virginia Solidarity Economy, but we want to be in touch with. This is why this session is really great. It's because we're in touch with California, we're in touch with Massachusetts, we're in touch with groups that are emerging in Indiana and Ohio and Puerto Rico. We're connecting to people who are down in Latin America and Europe as much as we can make possible. So I think I think that's a great way of like rethinking the boundaries. So sister groups in North Carolina, yeah, I mean, I would say Industrial Commons, Putter Emma, there's some good groups in yeah, in Asheville and Durham. Durham for All was an early influence on the work that we're doing. So, um, and building those connections and like where are the places where we get to connect is the kind of the question and trying to perpetuate those opportunities. So, Kali, did you want to say something?
I'm here to answer questions, but yeah, they wanted to bring me back on.
Yeah, what other questions?
Matthew, there's also a couple questions, and Kali, there's also a couple questions in the chat.
Chat.
Okay.
Let's see. Here's the question about public banking. And one thing I think, like Kali, I don't know how you all feel about this. Like some of this is like we're trying to balance this emergence, right? Like we're not trying to impose, we're trying to build up the activities that are actually happening. I would assume that California is kind of doing the same thing. Like, and how do you build from those strengths versus trying to like, oh, we're gonna take an idea and like implant it into the work we're doing and then see what happens with it. But always trying to be emergent.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that's interesting about California is we've had solidarity economy work going on for quite a long time, and some of it is pretty well developed. Um, so it's a little bit easier in a way to kind of promote it to other organizations. Like there are farm worker organizations that have taken on and union organizations and housing organizations that have all taken on elements of solidarity economy, either through land trust, doing like I was on the board of an affordable housing cooperative land trust um in San Francisco, and there's the LA Co-op Lab, and there's just a lot of, and they work with the local unions. So here, there's already a lot of potential for those collaborations to happen, and it's been demonstrated. I think in other parts of the country, a challenge might be that it does feel like something new that is being imposed. Um, and there are parts of California where that might be the case, but I think there's a lot of openness to it here. So if I was doing this in another state, I would probably be doing a lot more education and relationship building with social justice organizations in particular, and trying to understand what their needs are and how solidarity economy might just support what the work that they're doing. And also, I would say even in other states where there was not a very strong solidarity economy movement in general, there are things going on that are very much like solidarity economy, or they just don't know it yet. And so trying to help them understand how those dots connect, I think is, and the philosophies connect is very important. Really acknowledging the work that they're already doing.
Yeah. Thumbs up. I think the same. Like that is very much the same in Virginia. Like again, when we started, we were like, we're gonna use this framework of solidarity economy, but we were like, what does this mean for Virginia? Like we were looking at other states and other countries that were using the framework. Like what is like democracy and equity and pluralism and solidarity like actually like what's the relationship to Virginia and then who's doing that work? So yeah, I think a lot of that was like just relationship building. But and I 100% agree with Kali's note that I think these things are already here. They're just hidden. Um,
Mhm.
and so how do we make them present? April, that's fine. I think I'm fine with them sharing those slides. So
Yeah.
There's also a couple of questions about the 501c3 that are in the chat.
yeah, it's a conversation that and we've been having with the U.S. Solidarity Economy Network. So they're a 501c3. So right now we're technically Virginia Senate is technically fiscally sponsored through them. Um, um, again, like I think we're trying to balance out our like for Virginia Sen's case, right? Because we're very much like a non-organizationally structured network. We're like individuals. Um, so finding this balance between like having that structure and not having that structure has been a conversation, and not being totally beholden. But I mean, Mass and structure is much more like organizational. Like they have organizational partners that they're working with across the state that are already 501c3s that then they create that network and there's like space for them. Like they dedicate time to work on the network as a part of those efforts. Um, so I think we're just trying to figure that out. I don't think we have a good answer for it yet. We've been looking at different models and opportunities for trying to have those systems in place, but always looking for different process.
Do people have more questions about Virginia? You could also go into the Q&A.
Yeah.
We're getting close to time as well. Yeah. I see Ken asked a question about what business or industrial sectors is the solidarity economy model most suitable for. I mean, I've seen it in most sectors, but here in California, I will say one of the more successful models, particularly around worker co-ops, has been with restaurants. So the Arizmendi model, they developed like a training and resource center where they create an Arizmendi restaurant in one area, and they develop the worker cooperative, um, providing a lot of infrastructure that they would have to create independently if they weren't part of this hub, and they train them, and um yeah, and there's folks in those cooperatives that would never have had the resources to be part of a cooperative. They're local folks, they're people of color, working class, and they're able to own restaurants, and have seen this I think in Ohio, Cleveland as well. They really focused on this kind of model, but then that those seeds of Arizmendi then contribute back a little bit to the hub itself. Um, and yeah, it's modeled a little bit off the Mondragon model in Spain, and so that one has been very, very successful. I think partly because they're bakeries too, and so there's like a low overhead, so service, low overhead. We also have a lot of tech collectives here, and then I wouldn't say the ones around housing have been like super successful, the housing co-ops, just because there's so much funding that needs to go into it. It takes a really long time, but once they're done, those the cooperatives that are owned by the tenants themselves, they're in a lease. Generally, the land is in lease for about 100 years. So that is about as sustainable, affordable housing as we can get here in California. Um, yeah, so those are the ones that come to the top of my mind, but really any sector could be. I know there's one of the areas that we'd like to get into more, and the People's Network for Land and Liberation is working on this a little bit more, is more the basic sustenance of life, like manufacturing and food and things like that, and Cooperation Jackson as well, providing food for that area. So I think it's really important not to just focus on what's the low-hanging fruit, the easiest things to do, but also, especially in this time of polycrisis, what are the things that our communities absolutely need to survive, and producing those locally, cooperatively, and owned by the communities as billionaires and their corporations are trying to extract those resources and from our communities. So.
Love it.
Thank you so much. I think you saw that I came on, and yeah, that would be a good signal for transitioning. But thanks for sharing all the work and the insights that you shared, and really looking forward to interacting with you guys later today and throughout the coming years. So thanks for your labor. Really appreciate it. Matthew Slaats, Kali Luna.